My name is Johnny, and I have the privilege of being the CFO for Plano ISD. And a couple things about me as we get started is I have been with the district about 10 months, but I have been doing this for about 28, 29 years. And one thing that I was thinking about today is this is my 7th bond program to work through. So I do have some experience doing this. I am extremely happy to be in Plano ISD. I think it's a great district. Heard a lot of really good things about Plano ISD for years and years, and so very excited to be working here. Thank you for taking the time to be here this evening to learn more about our propositions that we have coming up here in just a couple of months. So going back, our Board of Trustees on August the 16th unanimously voted to do 2 different elections. One is called a voter-approved tax ratification election. I'll call that a VATRE. For short, it's a voter-approved tax ratification election. And also, our Board of Trustees called a bond election to be held on November the 8th of this year. So just to talk a little bit about a voter-approved tax ratification election, you don't really hear about that a whole lot. So what does that mean? It means that we are asking our voters to approve a modified M&O tax rate that will go over what's called the voter-approved tax rate to allow us to bring additional dollars into the maintenance and operational budget. That budget that we actually pay for our day-to-day operations, we're asking our voters to approve an adjusted tax rate to allow us to keep more of our taxes into the district. We'll talk more about that here in a second. So also, what is a bond election? We're more familiar with that term. A bond election is just what we go out and ask our voters to actually approve a proposition or propositions to actually go out and do capital expenses, build new construction, do renovations, those big ticketed type items. That comes through a bond election. So obviously, Plano ISD has grown a lot over the last 100 years. You can see that the community has been very, very supportive of bond propositions in the past. I believe there's 26 bond propositions that have happened in the last 100 years of our school district. And also I believe that all of them have been successful with the exception of maybe one. So very, very good support from our community on these bond elections. So just a little bit about tax rates. There's 2 different tax rates in a school district. You've got tax rates that funds the day-to-day operations. This is for the maintenance and operational side of the budget. You can see that this pays for salaries, utilities, supplies, those day-to-day operations that we need to do in order to properly operate a school district. And then you've got the interest and sinking. We call that the INS tax rate. This is what we actually levy to pay back on our outstanding bonds to pay for those big ticketed items that I mentioned earlier, like construction, new construction, renovations, even major capital equipment like technology and buses will come out of the INS side of the budget. So we get asked this a lot. This a question that comes up from just about every time we do a bond election, and that is, well, why don't you just save the money on your maintenance and operational side of your budget and then pay for these big ticket items out of your maintenance and operational budget? Well, you have to understand exactly how that works. On our maintenance and operational budget, approximately 86% of that budget is for compensation. We pay about 86% of our budget just for people. It's a very labor-intensive business that we're in education. If you add on top of that about 8% that we use for fixed contracted services like utilities and also like our software, our taxes to collect taxes, our SRO officers, our security, things of that nature, it adds up to about 8%. And so really we have about 4 or 5% of our budget that we call is discretionary. And so it's really not enough money on that side of the budget to pay for these one-time big-ticketed items. The state knew that, and that's why they set up the INS side of the budget to actually go out, have the community support, and actually sell these bonds and pay for these one-time big-ticketed items. Additionally, you have to understand that we don't get to keep additional taxes that comes into our district. We actually don't get to keep those additional revenues. What happens is the state, as we have additional revenues come in, the state decreases their share. It's a balancing act. So as values go up in our school district, our recapture, or what we pay back to the state, goes up accordingly. And so it's always this balancing act. And I'll show you a little bit more about that here in just a second. So districts like us, first of all, I think it's important to know there's about 1,000 school districts in the state of Texas, a little over 1,000 school districts. There are about 160 of those that are blessed with a good value. We get to keep so much value per student. After that amount, that the state calls that excess revenues, and we have to send that back to the state. There's about 160 out of those 1,000 school districts that are in that boat. Our school district is number 2 in the state as far as sending money back to the state. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of writing a check. It was a very hard day for me, writing a check for about $214 million back to the state, $214 million back to the state in the form of recapture. Out of those 160 school districts that are considered property wealthy, we are number 2. The number 1 district is Austin ISD. But if you take those 160 and actually add the top 10 recaptured paying districts, it makes up about 60% of the districts that are paying recapture. So you have a lot of recaptured paying districts that are relatively small, and then you have a few large ones like Plano ISD and Austin ISD, Houston ISD, Dallas ISD, that pay quite a bit of recapture back to the state. For every dollar that we levy, 37% of it is actually going back to the state in the form of recapture. So it's a real problem for our school district right now. It's a little over almost $5,100 per student is what we pay back to the state in the form of recapture. Now, I say all that to really put stress on this, and that is every amount of dollars that we levy on the INS side or the debt side of our budget, we get to keep 100% of that. So what's another good reason why we go through this process of doing bond elections is for every dollar we levy, we get to spend $1. If we were doing that on the M&O tax rate, 37% of every dollar we levied would have to go back to the state in the form of recapture. It's another good reason why we choose this method in order to pay for these one-time big-ticketed items. So let's talk a little bit more about the voter-approved tax ratification election. Well, number 1 is, like I said before, the reason why we do this is because it's one of the few ways left to us in order to actually bring additional dollars into our maintenance and operational side of the budget. One of the few options we have left. And of course, like I said, we use this maintenance and operational side of the budget to pay for staff, to keep a competitive staff, to pay for student programs. Any of those day-to-day operations, we have to use this budget in order to take care of those costs. By doing this voter-approved tax ratification election this year, we can bring an additional $9 million annually into our budget. $9 million annually into our budget. Also, it's important to note that this is, when you go to vote, this will be the Proposition A. This will be listed as Proposition A. I think it's important when we go to the voters and ask, for them to support some kind of proposition that we are putting before them, it's important to answer the question, why? And so I think it's important to go through this. Number 1 is classroom instruction. And obviously 86% of that classroom instruction is found in the form of a teacher. I don't know if you're hearing the media, what's going on in the media, but we're having a hard time finding quality teachers. One of the ways that we're trying to get good quality teachers and staff into our district is by paying a competitive salary. That comes out of this budget. Number 2 is increased revenues for student programs. If you're keeping up with what inflation has done, you can see that the cost of continuing to offer good quality programs has gone up significantly, mainly because of the cost of inflation. This is another reason why we need to increase the size of our budget. And then finally, just what I mentioned a while ago, competitive staff. It's getting harder and harder to find. This is one way that we can try to do that. We actually, every time we'll do our compensation, we actually compare ourselves with 16, what we call peer districts, those districts that are surrounding us. We want to make sure that we have a competitive salary compared with our peer districts. And then up at the top right, you can see continuing offering quality programs and activities. These programs cost money, and so we want to be able to continue to provide the best programs we can for our students. And then finally, because recapture has been going up and up very rapidly, we have a growing deficit on our maintenance and operational side of our budget. As a result of that, this $9 million would help go toward offsetting that deficit. And then finally, maximizing the M&O funding. By us doing this voter-approved tax ratification election, this VATRE, we would be maximizing the amount of state fundings and local fundings that we're able to achieve on our M&O side of our budget. So this is just taking even a closer look. I mentioned about a deficit. We actually approved this year a $38.9 million deficit. And unfortunately, that's growing. We've been very blessed because we have a healthy fund balance. But I can tell you, unless we are able to bring in more money legislatively or through mechanisms like a VATRE, eventually we will have to start cutting our programs that we're offering to our students here in Plano ISD. So it's important that we are actively involved with trying to maximize the funding that we can. Additionally, if you're keeping up with federal funding as a result of the pandemic, you'll know that there are federal funds called ESSER funds, and those funds will start to fall off over the next couple of years. There's ESSER 2 funds and there's ESSER 3 funds. Those will actually start falling off in 23-24 and then 24-25. And then all the items that we mentioned before when we're talking about answering the question of why. So I think this is important because I think at the end of the day, people want to know, well, how will this impact my taxes, right? I'm a residential owner here. I'll have to pay taxes to Plano ISD. I want to know, by voting for or voting against this proposition, what does it actually do for me? So I think it's important to go through those scenarios and just be totally transparent with our community on this. The very first column is what our tax rate was for this past year. You can go down and look at the row where it says $1.32075. Do you see that? And then, of course, you can see the tax liability. That's for school taxes for an average homeowner. An average homeowner is a house with approximately $508,000, a market value of $508,000. They would have paid tax liability into Plano ISD of about a little over $5,400. So one good thing because of tax compression laws is values did go up quite a bit in our school district this year. Okay, there's laws that came out back in 2019 that says once values go up over 2.5%, you have to start compressing or lowering your tax rate. As a result, if you look in the second column and go down, do you see right across from the $1.32075? You can see that the tax rate for this year that was adopted by our board on August the 16th was going down from $1.32075 to $1.25975. That is 6.1 cent decrease. 6.1 cent decrease. So you can see from the same value house from year to year would have gone down about $250. Okay? And that is where our board adopted a tax rate. Now this VATRE election says simply that if it is successful, then you will go with the adopted tax rate, which you see in the middle column, $1.25975. If the VATRE election is unsuccessful, then that M&O rate will roll back about 3.2 cents to what's called a voter-approved tax rate. So that's what you see in the far right column. So if unsuccessful, your overall rate would roll back to $1.22815. The difference between the two rates, between a successful VATRE and an unsuccessful VATRE, is about $120 a year on an average homeowner in Plano ISD. Okay? So taxes are going down 6.1 cents. That's about $250. If it's unsuccessful, it would roll back a little bit more, about an additional $120. Now the difference is you could save $120 a year for an average homeowner, but what you would give up to the district is about $9 million in funding for the students and the staff of Plano ISD. So that's the trade-off. That's a decision we're asking each of our residential homeowners and voters to actually make on November the 8th. Not to make it even more confusing, but this is the ballot. And the ballot changed with Senate Bill 2 back in 2019. And if I was being totally transparent, I would have on the ballot at the bottom that your taxes are going up $9 million. That's how much we get to keep. But they are strictly looking at property taxes year over year. They're not taking into account the offset of recapture into our school district whenever they do the ballot. So at the bottom, if you see taxes going up $38.6 million, that is how much the taxes are going up due to those increases in values. What they don't tell you on this ballot is you have to recognize that additional revenues as taxes, as revenue, and then you've got to increase the recapture as expense. So what you get to keep as the net amount difference is about $9 million, okay? That is the Prop A ballot that you will be voting on in November. All right, going more into the bond election, the bond side of the election, the first thing I think it's important to note is that we had 70 members that came together in our community. It's very cross-sectional. I mentioned before, this is the 7th time that I've done this. By far the best group of folks that we've had, community members that have come through and gone through this process. Very, very, very cross-sectional as far as we had parents, grandparents, business leaders, Chamber of Commerce members, we had teachers, principals, PTA members, just a little bit of everything was represented in this group, and they did an excellent job. What they did is took about 5 months. It actually, I think there was maybe 9 or 10 meetings total, and they came together to analyze data that was presented by the staff. They went through a technology assessment. They went through a facility assessment. They looked at construction, renovation, acquisition needs. They validated the cost, and they came up with a list that they recommended to our Board of Trustees. Once again, just like with the VATRE, I think it's important to know a bond election, why? I mean, why would we be asking our communities to consider this? Starting at the upper left, you can see that Plano ISD has a growing demand for our CTE programs and innovative programs. The district has, and the task force really wanted to be competitive with our surrounding peer districts in offering these innovative programs here in Plano ISD. Number 2 is just providing necessary technology. The pandemic showed us a lot of everything we do is driven at some point instructionally with technology. And so we want to keep up and provide our staff and our students the latest, greatest technology that's available. Number 3 is essential upgrades to safety and security. You heard Kevin talk about it earlier. Our number 1 goal, and we talk about this almost on a daily or at least a weekly basis, number 1 goal as administration and as staff of Plano ISD is to keep our students safe. And so we put quite a bit of funding into this bond proposition in order to go back and relook and do the best we can with that. Number 4 on the upper right-hand column is address deficiencies in our facilities. We have approximately 9.5 million square feet of property that we're entrusted to take care of. It's important. I think that's about 91 different facilities, about 73 campuses and 19 auxiliary buildings. And so just like your house, about every 20 years, you've got to maintain and keep those up. And so that's what we're wanting to do. We spent about 18 months going through and doing an in-depth facility assessment that we turned over to this committee to actually take it and verify it and ask questions on that assessment. Number 5 is repair, replace, and build competitive extracurricular facilities. One thing that this committee realized was as you compare with these districts around us in Collin County that were growing rapidly, they had really nice extracurricular facilities. And our facilities hadn't been touched, a lot of them hadn't been touched in 20 plus years. So it was important that we went back and started looking to make sure that we had competitive extracurricular facilities that we could provide for our student athletes. And then finally, replacing buses and work vehicles. We have, believe it or not, we have over 300 bus routes every day. We transport about 14,000 students on a daily basis. And we want to make sure that we are able to transport them in a safe environment as well. So if you lay this out, a while ago you saw, Kevin, where you had Prop A for that $40 million. We were going to do Prop A for a bond, and then A, B, C, and D on the bond, and then a Prop A for the VATRE. We took that to the Secretary of State, and they said, no, you have to have everything in sequential order, mainly because of the way the ballots are electronic now, that it'll just roll. So on the VATRE, what you saw a while ago, that's Prop A. And then B for bond, just think B for bond. The bond starts with B, C, D, and E. And I'll go over this in a lot of detail here in a second. You can look at the dollar amounts, but mainly the big one, which is called general provisions, that's in Proposition B. You'll see they split out. In years past, they might have all been put in one. But we had a bill came out in 2019 called SB 30, Senate Bill 30, where certain items had to be split out just by what they were asking for. So the reason why you see this in 4 different propositions instead of all lumped together is because of SB 30. Okay. The Prop B, of course, is general provisions. That's anything that's instructional related or administratively related. A facility would be in Prop B. Prop C would be anything that's considered instructional technology. Now, I'm not talking about the infrastructure technology. I'm talking about what I call personal technology equipments, like the one-to-one devices. By SB 30 is required to be separated out now. That's why you see that in its standalone proposition. Okay? Prop D is an event center. That's another thing. Any kind of extracurricular activity that's not administrative or not instructional has to be separated out. So our community will vote on it. Whether it passes or whether it fails, it'll be by itself. Okay? And then finally on Prop E, that is stadiums, any kind of safety to a stadium. The stadium is any kind of stadium that has over 1,000 seat capacity. So in our case, we have Kimbrough and Clark, are stadiums that have more than 1,000 seats. You're going to see that separated out into Prop E. Okay? So if you want to know the percentages of each one of the props, obviously, vast majority of this is found in Prop B, which is the way it should be, because it's instructional and it's administrative in nature. So vast majority will be in the general provision, in our case, Prop B. You can also see technology is about 11%. You can see the event center is about 9%. And then finally, stadiums is just a little over 1%. So Prop B is obviously the biggest part of our bond. And you can see that we have subheadings in Prop B. You can actually see that we have major and minor renovations. I'll just point out the differences between major and minor because you may not know. A major renovation is when you basically just go into it like your house. If you're redoing a bathroom and you're completely wiping it all out all the way down to the studs and then rebuilding it up, that's what a major renovation is. And we did the same. So if we're doing a major renovation, we're going to take all the interior out of it, totally take it down to the studs and rebuild it. A minor renovation is simply looking at the ceilings, the walls, and the flooring. I call it doing just a makeup where it'll look prettier when you walk through, but it's not taking into account the infrastructure or the bones of a building. That's a minor renovation. Safety and security, infrastructure. Infrastructure is what we call as your life systems, your life cycle systems, like HVAC equipment, roofing, restrooms, any kind of controls, anything of that nature would really you need it to keep that building functioning properly, the life cycle systems. That's what that infrastructure is, and of course transportation. And then we have fine arts, we have technology infrastructure, we have campus athletics, and then we have our CTE programs. Those are the 8 subcategories under Proposition B. So let's go through these. And first of all, we have the major renovations. Do you remember what I said on the major renovations? This is when you basically take everything down and you rebuild it from the inside out. We have Plano Senior High School just right across the street from here. And that building, I'll show you the ages here in a second, but that is by far the largest project that we've got going. And that is by far the oldest high school that we have here as well, the oldest senior high school we have here. $205 million. We have Haggard Middle School, which is where you're sitting. That is going to be a replacement building. The difference between a major renovation and replacing a building has to do with the infrastructure, the foundational of that building. So if ever possible, what we do is we want that building to last another 50 years. And if those foundations, like at Williams, we did a major renovation there because the foundation was good for another 50 years. But it was determined by experts at this building when they looked at the foundational work that it was not going to last another 50 years. As a result, we're going to take it completely down and replace it. You see the high school renovations, which is at Williams. We've already begun phase 1 at Williams. This will complete that process. And then at Clark, there's some foundational issues that will be addressed at that building. Elementary school kitchens, you'll see some major renovations. You'll also see in a second some kitchens that are minor renovations. We had experts come through and actually determine whether those kitchens needed completely taken down to the studs and reworked because of because of just the pathways, whether they needed additional walk-in freezers or the way the serving lines worked. And then other ones just simply needed to have floorings redone, walls redone. And so you'll see those in minor renovations. Because of so many kitchens, we actually have about, on each bond program, which we actually look at about every 6 or 7 years, we have about a third of our campuses that will always be touched on each bond program on our kitchens. Kitchens are one of those things, it doesn't last as long as the rest of the building. So you have to address it about every 20 years. You really need to be working on addressing those cafeterias. And then, of course, we have elementaries. You can see the names there. Then we have a couple of middle schools as well. These are the major innovations. The Williams High School, 61 years old. This will actually complete that building. If you've been in Williams and looked at the phase 1 renovations and looked at the rest of the building, night and day difference. It's really impressive. So you can see what the rest of that building is going to look like. Haggard Middle School, 48 years old. So obviously, when the bonds pass, then it'll take about a year and a half to do schematic drawings, and then it'll start construction. Construction will be a couple of years, which will tip it over that 50-year mark. And then Plano Senior High is 47 years old, and then Clark High School is 43 years old. Okay. Minor renovations, like I said before, walls, ceilings, flooring, paint. These are the touch-up items that just makes it. You can still walk in and think, "Oh, this looks really nice," but it's not actually addressing the core infrastructure of that building. You can see Plano East and Plano West, specific buildings at each one of those campuses. It's interesting to note, obviously Plano West is the newest of the 3 senior highs, but that campus was actually built around an original, and I'm sure some of the folks here can tell me what that original building was, but that Campus A was actually already there when they built Plano West. And so we're having to redo that building because it's just that end of useful life. You can look at the service center, which is where we do a lot of our auxiliary support services, just touching that building up. And then, of course, we come to the kitchen, the minor kitchen upgrades. And you see the kitchens that are addressed to there, as well as a couple of the elementary renovations. And then food service and equipment, the $1 million there is just for major equipment to replace. Those are kind of your steamers, your warmers, items of that nature. I said a while ago, infrastructure, maintenance, the system and compliance, those are your life safety items. Those are like your HVAC systems and things of that nature. I know that they're finishing up that right now, but you can go to our website, and I'll tell you how to get to the website here in a little while. On the website, if you want to go, what makes up the system and compliances by campus. So if you've got a child that's in an elementary, you can go to that campus. It'll tell you exactly what makes up that system and compliance as well as everything else for each of those campuses. You can get a detailed list of what this bond will do for each specific, not only campus, but also on auxiliary buildings as well. One thing that I really love is the fact that we're going to try to, every playground that we own on all of our campuses, we're going to actually redo to make them completely ADA accessible. We have the wood chips right now. Those aren't really accessible. We're going to go back with an artificial turf where you can even wheel a wheelchair up on it, go right up to the facilities. There'll be new equipment put up as well as the shade structures, and it'll just be a really nice piece for all of our elementaries. And obviously, most of our elementaries are in communities, suburb, little community areas, which will be really nice for those communities. Capital improvement projects is simply each year things come up where a teacher or a principal needs a door added here because of what they're doing with the classroom. Those are those annual capital projects that come up from year to year. We spend about $800,000 a year, believe it or not, on just actually this classroom needs to be, we're going to do something different in this classroom, so we need a wall put up, or we need a wall or a door or whatever, and that's what those projects are for. That's what one of those playgrounds is going to look like. When we say upper and lower, we simply mean that the lower is for the early childhood grades up through second grade, and the upper is just for the upper elementary ages. That's the difference between when you see upper and lower. Okay, safety and security. I won't go through each of these lists because Kevin covered this already, but I do want to point out the $40 million that you saw up on top. Obviously, when the committee was going through this process, right at the very, very end, Uvalde happened. And it really got a lot of feedback from our community, like what exactly are we doing for infrastructure, safety and security? What does that look like for us? And so we really took that seriously, and we hired a company called PBK Architects, or a nationwide architect firm, but they have a arm of their business that they actually do safety and security from an engineering, from an architectural standpoint. So we've hired them to come in and do an in-depth look at every one of our campuses, and they're going to give us recommendations. The worst thing we could do is for them to come through and give us recommendations, and then us say, oh, that's really good. And the next time we do a bond election, we're going to add it in 6 or 7 years. So we did not want to do that. And so what our committee did at the last minute is they asked our Board of Trustees to add $40 million to cover, up to $40 million to cover these items that came out of this in-depth safety and security audit. Technology infrastructure. This is the technology, I call it the bones, or what makes my laptop work. We have Patrick Tanner here this evening. He is our assistant sup for technology, extremely smart gentleman. He can explain in depth what each of these means. But simply put, this is what makes our laptops, all of our devices work. Okay? So cabling, all of the networking, stuff of that nature. Transportation, these are our buses. One thing I do want to point out on the buses and transportation is that buses normally have a useful life of approximately 10 years. We actually will drive our buses 15 years here. Before we turn them over and replace them, we like to get 15 years out of our buses. We do that because we have an excellent mechanic staff, and we do a lot of our own PM work here. Also, you can see that building is about 40 years old, and it's way too small. And so we're going to expand that transportation facility. 40 years ago, we were less than half the size as we are now. And it's not safe. And the mechanic, what we call our bus bins, where we actually do the PM work, it's extremely unsafe. And so we're going to look at addressing the needs of just making it a larger facility. Also, we have White Fleet, which is basically our work vehicles that we do transport staff from places to place in our district. And then also, one thing that I do want to point out, we had if you've got kids in the district, transportation-wise, we had a hard start to the year, mainly because the day before we started our school this year, we had about 45 of our approximately 300 drivers that came down with COVID. And so as a result, we were scrambling. And to be perfectly honest with you, we learned a few things from going through that process. One of the things we really learned was that we needed to attract students. We had a hard time because it was all paper, but we have a great technology system. There is a system out there called Smart Tag. Is that right? Smart Tag? And so what that'll do is when a student gets on that bus, they'll actually swap in, and we'll know exactly who's on our buses, where they're at. The parents can get on and find out where their student is. Are they on the bus? When are they going to be at a stop? It'll actually show them in 10 minutes they'll be at your stop. You can actually go to meet them. So we're wanting to use technology to do a better job of keeping up with our technology, or not our technology, but our students while they're on the bus. I know you think I'm joking here, but that is one of our White Fleet. It's actually maroon, but that's one of the buses or the vans that we have here that we're currently using to transport some of our students around. So we really want to update our White Fleet and make it presentable, but also just want to make sure it's safe for kids to go from place to place. CTE and innovative programs. There was really, to be perfectly honest with you, our bond task force really stressed the fact that they wanted to really get caught up with where we were with CTE programs and innovative programs. And so a couple of items that they have listed here is a Career and Technology Center, a standalone center that we can actually bring our students over to, and they can actually start right now CTE classes. Students are 11th and 12th grade before they're able to do that. We'd like to get them started earlier so they can actually come out with certifications whenever they leave the school. either to help them pay their way through college or to actually get a job that they can actually go out and start making a good living. And so we're looking at that, but also the CTE classes that we're offering, even in our senior high schools, updating those, making those more appropriate for the classes that we're teaching in those spaces. And so you can go down through the list. These are all about just updating our CTE programs in our school district. The fine arts, the last bond program that we had in 2016 was very heavy on our fine arts programs. This is simply us keeping up with the end of useful life equipment in each of these programs. So that's what you see here. It's going to be like, well, you can see like music, that's sheet music. You can see theater, art. Those are for capital equipment for those programs. The very bottom one is band trailers. And those are to provide band trailers for all of our senior highs, which are very, very, yes, sir.
I think the music included instrument updates for end of life.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No,
looking for something to say what it was.
That's exactly right. Thank you. It's all of our band instruments as well. Campus athletics. One thing that I will say on our senior highs is that in our high schools, one thing that we've tried to do is start in, it's 11th and 12th grade. But one thing that we've tried to do in order to help our kids become not more competitive, but to help them transition into that senior high level of competition is to bring the 9th and 10th graders over during athletic periods to actually work with the 11th and 12th during the athletic periods. By doing that, though, that we have a need for additional gym space. So this bond would actually provide 2 additional gyms at each one of our senior high schools. Additionally, it would provide a 4-lane track at each of our middle schools. And these would be open to the community to walk at night. One thing we'd like to do is just have something where our kids are actually exercising. Our PE and our middle school, our athletics, are actually running. They don't have a track to run on. So this would provide and take care of those needs. We would have turf. This is not adding additional turf. This is replacing end-of-life turf fields. And then athletic uniforms. One thing that we want to try to do, just be creative, is actually do our uniforms out of the bond. If you remember a while ago, do you remember the percentage of recapture that comes out of your bonds? It's 0. The percentage that comes out of your general operating fund, 37%. Anything we can legally take out of the bond, we want to try to do that to create additional capacity on our operating side of our budget. Okay, these are Plano Senior High. These are just some items that we're wanting to actually hit. You can see the tennis courts redoing the tennis courts at all of the senior highs. You can see the locker room. A lot of these locker rooms haven't been touched since those campuses were built. Concession stands, auxiliary safety lights, 8-foot fence around tracks just for safety and security. Those items at each of our senior highs. You have Plano Senior High there. You have the exact same items at Plano East as you have at Plano West. Okay? So Prop B, that is your Proposition B, which is, remember, instructional or administrative. This is what the proposition ballot language will look at. It's important to read through because the very last statement says this is a property tax increase. If you remember from the overall tax rate would be going down 6.1 cents. Part of Senate Bill 2 that came out in 2019 says it doesn't matter if your tax rate's going up or going down. Every one of your ballots must now have this language in it. And so that's why you see it on there. Okay? All right, so let's go through Prop C, which is your instructional technology. This is personal technology, so I can pick it up, walk out the door, and it won't change that facility at all. By SB 30, Senate Bill 30, this has to be spelled out on a separate proposition. You can see the mobile one-to-one devices, 73 million. Classroom multimedia AV. These are your what you see when you walk into a classroom. Your displays that you see on the walls. Your sound, anything of that nature would be considered classroom multimedia AV. And user technology upgrades. This is going to be like your printers, your staff not laptops, but your staff desktops, top computers. If you've got a lab, any kind of a lab, this would be included in this category. Your enterprise system is just your HR software, your business, your finance software, your learning media, same deal as your library equipment that you've got, and then your copy machine replacements is also on there. Just like with Prop B, you can see that the very last sentence is this is a property tax increase. I just want to point out that the tax rate is going down, but this statement is required to be on each one of your ballots, okay? The event center is Proposition D. This is something that actually the bond task force came up with and discussed in our district, wanted to bring this before our community as a vote. This is something, we don't have anything of this nature in our school district. And for us to actually have a graduation, we have to go to the STAR. And for us to have convocation, we have to go somewhere, we have to go somewhere else to have all of these special events outside of our district. And so this was a desire by the bond task force to actually have something that we could bring in that would bring in, bring in an additional business, but also provide those venues, not only for extracurriculars, but also for UIL, robotics, any number of items that we could actually bring in and house in this event center. Probably the closest thing to this around us was it would be the Curtis Colwell Center over in Garland. This would be a facility that would hold about 8,500 people, and we could rent it out. We did talk with the folks over at Garland, and they actually bring in about $2.5 million a year into their facility there. I'm not saying that we'd be able to do that at ours, but we're trying to do something very similar with that. I will say it would not. I just want to be completely transparent. It could bring in about $2.5 million of revenue, but it does take money, about $3 million to operate. So about $3 million to operate something of this nature. You could bring in about $2.5 million, and then we'd also have probably about $300,000 of cost avoidance, where we wouldn't have to pay the STAR for graduation, that we wouldn't have to pay these other expenses. And so I think it's important to note that I don't think that it would be a break even, but it would pay for a lot of it, the operating cost. Okay. This Proposition B, SB 30 simply says that anything that is a recreational facility, not instructional, not administrative, but is a facility, must be spelled out and actually voted on separately. That's why you see this on a separate ballot. The language is very, very similar. I think it's important to note that it would house not only recreational and extracurriculars, but it would also hold academic events as well. Once again, the very last sentence, this is a property tax increase, must be stated on this. All right, and then finally we have Proposition E. A lot of people say, well, Proposition, this is for a stadium. I'm automatically against it. I think it's important to note this is not us building a new stadium. This is simply taking care of the two stadiums that we have. Out of this $19 million, $12 million of it is just simply to replace a parking lot at Clark Stadium. I would encourage you to go over there and drive over that parking lot if you get an opportunity, and then you can answer that question for yourself whether it's needed. Also, there is security fencing, security lighting at those two stadiums. That's just a couple of pictures at Clark Stadium. And of course, some of the facilities at the concession stands would be updated as well. Very similar language on the Proposition E on the ballot. Tax information, I'm going to go through this. I'm running out of time, so I want to take as much time as I can, but I'm going to value your time too and try to get you out of here pretty quick. But I think it is important to talk about the tax information just a little bit more. I will say that the folks that have come before me, the board of directors, the finance staff, really the administration in general, has done a very, very nice job of taking care of the district's taxes over the years. You can see all the awards that the finance department has won over the years, which is just a testament to conservative management. So where do we stack up with our tax rates? These are the tax rates for this year. I think it's important to note. In Collin County, we are the second lowest, and we're catching Frisco. One thing I will point out, though, if you look at the INS tax rates, which is how we manage our debt on our bonds, you can see that we are by far the lowest on our overall INS tax rate. Okay. Overall, I mentioned tax compression, which simply means over 2.5%. Whenever your values grow over 2.5%, you have to start lowering those rates by law. You can see as a result, over the last 5 years alone, tax rate has gone down almost 18 cents. Okay. So the board has already set the INS tax rate for our school district for this next year. So whether this bond election passes or whether it fails, the overall tax rate will remain at $23.74, which means your tax liability for this next year, whether the bond passes or doesn't pass, will be exactly the same. I get asked this a lot. How is that possible for almost $1.5 billion worth of bond items? And it's simply put, our outstanding debt that we have is in the aqua. The new debt on the 1.5 is in the gray area. In the state of Texas, school districts can go out on their debt up to 40 years. We have a policy in Plano ISD that we will not, by policy, not go out more than 20 years, half that distance. As a result of that, we pay off our debt a lot quicker. We're able to save millions of, really hundreds of millions of dollars in interest as a result of that. And by doing that, you can see how quickly we've paid off the previous outstanding debt, which means we can layer in this new debt and not go up any on our tax rate as a result. Okay? We simply ladder it out over the next 20 years. Okay? One thing that I do think that is important to talk about, and that is, well, you know, it may not be a good time to actually have a bond election, but if you're familiar with what the cost of construction has done over the last couple of years, you can see by waiting simply 6 years, which is the next time we would be coming to the community for another bond election, the increase of those same facilities that need to be updated would have gone up about 42%. Okay? So you can see this last year alone, almost 14% increase in cost of construction. So there is a cost with waiting. Voting will start, you must be registered to vote by Tuesday, October the 11th. That is the deadline to register to vote. Early voting will be October the 24th and will run through November the 4th. And then, of course, Election Day, Tuesday, November the 8th. Once again, you will be asked to vote for 5 propositions. You can look at those on the board. Prop A is your VATRE. Prop B is your big general provision. Think B for bond, right? That's the big one, which is instructional or administrative facilities. Prop C is instructional technology. Those are your personal technology devices. Prop D is your event center, and Prop E is your stadiums that have more than 1,000 seats. Want to know more? Well, I can tell you our communication staff has done an excellent job of, literally, we have a website that's devoted to talking about any question you could possibly think of. They've done a really good job. And that is at pisd.edu/elections 2022. And then also, I think this is the second year maybe of Let's Talk. Any kind of questions you have, just you can get on there, and they are very, very responsive to answer questions that you might have. And then we also have just a code there that you can click on and submit questions also. That is it. I'm about 5 minutes past. I apologize for that. That's a lot of information. But once again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys coming out and listening to information about the bond and the VATRE elections for November. Thank you for your time.